Hi everyone, my name's Danielle McCoy and I'm the director of the OASIS at Methodist College, and I'm here with our Methodist College counselor, Kendra Moultrie, and the nursing coordinator in the CSS, Melissa Williams. So the OASIS and the CSS are teaming up to bring you some tips and information on how to do your absolute best on your exams. So Kendra and I will start by talking about test anxiety and how it can affect your ability to perform well on your exams. And then Melissa will talk to you about some strategies for thinking through your exam questions. So let's start by talking about the mind-body connection. Your mind and your body are in constant communication with each other, and the thoughts you have can affect the way your body feels, and vice versa. The way your body feels can influence the thoughts you have. So think about how your body feels sometimes when you're especially nervous about an exam. Maybe your heart is racing, your palms might get sweaty, you might feel some tension in your body. So there are ways to get a hold of those symptoms so that you can feel more relaxed during your exams. And a lot of it has to do with your brains and your thinking patterns. So in most everyday situations, you should feel relatively relaxed, meaning your heart isn't constantly racing, your palms aren't constantly sweaty. And in those situations where you're relaxed, your prefrontal cortex is in charge of your thinking. So the prefrontal cortex is the front part of your brain, and it's responsible for executive functioning, like rational thought, logical thinking, which is good because in most situations we want to be thinking logically and rationally, right? However, when our brain perceives a threat, such as a spider, or a bear chasing us, or a toddler running out into traffic, the amygdala takes charge instead, and the prefrontal cortex takes a back seat. And so the amygdala is that part of the brain that's involved in our fight or flight response. It reacts really quickly without a lot of thought. And so that's why people will sometimes say they don't even remember what happened during times of high stress or like heroic acts because their amygdala just told their body to react. So maybe you've experienced your mind going blank during exams. So you've studied, you know your stuff, but then you go into the exam and all of a sudden it's all gone. Your mind just goes blank. That could be because your amygdala has taken over because of that stress, and your prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that's responsible for that rational thinking, has just kind of diminished. So, when the amygdala is in charge, your body starts preparing to either fight the threat or run from it. And so that's why you'll feel your heart start racing, your palms get sweaty, the blood starts flowing to your arms and legs, and that rational or logical thinking is diminished. And there's definitely times when we want that process to happen. So, for example, when there's actual danger. If you see a toddler running out into traffic, you don't really want your brain to like pause and think through that situation. You just want your body to react. So, in that instance, it's great that our amygdala takes over. But what about during exams? So think about the thoughts you've had about your exams. Do you ever tell yourself, I have to pass this exam? Or my life is over if I don't do well in this exam? Those types of thoughts can convince your brain and body that the exam is a threat. And I get it. You've spent a lot of time and money on your education, and there's a lot riding on your exams. However, your best shot of getting a good grade is if you can keep your prefrontal cortex in charge and quiet down that amygdala. So if you're really stressed during exams, it might be because your amygdala has taken over. Your prefrontal cortex wants to be in charge and help you think through those questions logically, but if the amygdala is in charge, the prefrontal cortex can't really help you. So how do we keep the prefrontal cortex in charge? I'm going to pass things over to Kendra now, who's going to talk to you about some things you can do before, during, and after your exams that can help make sure your amygdala does not take over.
All right, so what Danielle has talked to you guys about is learning more information about the different parts of your brain and how anxiety and stress can affect them. So what I want to talk to you guys about is different strategies and techniques that you can use while you are taking your test, before the test, and after the test. So before the test, one of the main things that you can do is utilize your resources. So check in with the CSS staff and their teachers and tutors so that they can give you some tips on how to effectively study, and they can also help you decrease your anxiety in your testing environment. So a big thing is, actually learning how to utilize those resources and strategies in the same environment that you would be testing in. And right now, since everyone is at home, and so typically you're going to be taking your test at home, and since we have video options available, you can do video chat with them and they can ask you questions and then walk you through different relaxation techniques to decrease that anxiety in your testing environment. The other thing that you can do is utilize these different strategies that I'm going to go through with you. Number one is taking, deep breaths. I know that it sounds silly to focus on breathing, but it really gives you a chance to regroup and ground yourself. The other one is intentional self-care. So I don't mean, eating all of the snacks you have at home or taking the time to binge watch your favorite Hulu or Netflix series. I mean, really focusing on what your body says that it needs and making sure that you're in tune with that. The next thing that you can do is create a positive statement or a self-talk mantra. So an example of that would be, I'm going to do the best that I can. Um, and so that's just something that you can put, stick a sticky note on your computer, take a picture of it, make it your screensaver on your phone so that you can look at it throughout the day, post it, somewhere that you're going to see it and it's going to be meaningful to you. Try and steer away from statements like, I'm going to get an A on this test, because it just kind of leaves room for disappointment if you don't do as well as you thought. And so the main focus of that is just encouraging. And so not that you wouldn't be able to ace that test, but something that's going to just encourage you to be able to visualize that success down the road. The next thing that you can do is muscle relaxation. So a lot of times we don't even realize where the stress triggers that in our body because it's not always the same for everyone. So you can go through your different muscles, tighten them and loosen them, and then get an idea of when you are feeling stress, what muscles or areas of your body do feel more tense. And so then you can learn how to relax them when you're experiencing a high anxiety situation. The other tool that you can utilize is grounding techniques. So your brain can't occupy two thoughts at once, or multiple things at once. So you really want to focus on what you can see, hear, touch, anything, that you can physically do in the moment so that you are taking away from that stressful, anxiety-induced thoughts going through your head and you're, refocusing on something else. The main thing is, we have so many negative thoughts throughout the day and it takes about 9 positive thoughts just to combat one negative. So anything that you can do to increase your positivity and self-outlook is going to be really helpful for you. The other thing is make sure that you're practicing good sleep hygiene. Again, that goes with being in tune with your body and what it needs. Drink plenty of water. Stay away from caffeinated drinks, sugary drinks. So, please do not drink coffee, iced tea, or Red Bull and Monsters before you are going to be taking your test or while you're studying. Another thing that you can do is, of course, feel free to check in with me at the OASIS. You can email me and I am available for phone calls or video chats right now. The next thing I want to go over with you is what is going to be going on during the test. So main thing, take a deep breath. You're here, you're going to do as good as you are going to be able to do. The first thing is trust yourself. At this point, you know everything that you are going to know about this topic. You're not going to be able to learn anything else right now. You really want to hone in on the information that you do have. So part of that is, again, visualizing your success. You have made it this far in your program, or maybe you're just starting out, but you're still here. You're in college, and this is, something that is important to you. And so I'm sure that you did the work in order to be here. So you deserve it. You deserve the success. The next thing is read the questions all the way through. So what our brain likes to do sometimes, and it tricks us, is that it will, zone in on a word that we see in the sentence, and it will automatically pair it with an answer that we perceive as correct. But what you really need to do is you want to make sure you read that question all the way through so that you're providing the correct answer for what that question is really asking. The next thing is utilize your deep breathing. Say your mantra. Use those resources that you have been practicing so that you can, occupy your brain with something positive. You're reframing those negative thoughts. Um, Take a break if you need to during the test. Do not feel like you have to rush yourself. This is not a race. You really want to do what you feel like you need in that moment. Um, if you have the opportunity to ask questions, then please feel free to do that. Utilize the resources that you have available to you. All right, so here we are after the test, and you may feel that spike of anxiety again, whether you did well or whether you didn't do as well as you wanted to. Either way, breathe a sigh of relief because you made it through. Congratulate yourself no matter what your score was. You did the best that you can do, and that is okay. Do something that you enjoy. So one of the things, if you can take a step back, is before your test, think of something that you're going to do after, and really, encourage yourself to do that after you take the test, no matter what score you got. So if you enjoy ice cream, then promise yourself that you're going to go get ice cream after the test, no matter what. Just make sure that you're making a plan. Um, the other thing that you can do is, of course, you can stop by the CSS or the OASIS so that we, can help you maybe decrease some of that anxiety that you're experiencing. If we're available, we want you to be successful in the future. And so if that means you utilize some of those strategies we talked about and they didn't work for you, then maybe we need to look into something different. But the main thing is that we are here and we are available, and we're really focused on you being successful while you are at, our college, and we want to help you the best way that we can. So I hope that you found this helpful, and I encourage you to try some of those grounding techniques, try some of those stress reducing strategies, and then feel free to let us know how they work for you or if they don't, and then we can look into something else. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Melissa Williams and I am our nursing coordinator in the Center for Student Success at the college. So you've heard from Danielle about some things that might cause some anxiety during testing. You also heard from Kendra, our counselor, on some strategies to rein in that anxiety before, during, and after exams. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on some effective ways to approach exam questions and answer options in a general sense, regardless of degree program. So let's get started. Okay, so this is where the bulk of my part of the presentation is going to focus on. Some effective versus less effective or ineffective approaches. So I'm going to start with some things that are good to do. This is my system of approaching questions. The first thing that I do is I make sure that I read the entire question, and I mean all of it. So I know that you guys, when you're in a test, you think, okay, I'm going to read my test question, but I'm sure that there have been times where you go back for exam review with your instructor and you're like, oh, I missed that word. That's really important. I can't believe I missed that word. Or, oh, I read that question wrong. So make sure you read your entire question. That's my first step every time. The second thing I do is I go back and I look, are there any key words in that question that I really need to focus on that are going to help me answer this correctly? So if I miss timing, first, last. Those are really important. Absolute words, if you see something that says, what do you always do or never do, or what's the one thing that you're going to look for, those are very absolute. Also, prioritization. So if you see things that says, what's the most important or what's the least important, it's kind of a reverse prioritization. So timing and keywords, those are all very, very important. That's the second thing I do. The third thing I do after I look for keywords is I rephrase the question into my own words. And this is not taking the question and rereading the question again. This is taking those keywords that I found and figuring out, okay, what are they really asking me? And I rephrase it in my own words, because what that's going to do, that's going to really help you make sure that you're answering the question that they want you to answer. There's a lot of times where you go to answer a question that they're not actually asking you. So be careful and rephrase the question into your own words. The next thing I do is I think about the pathophysiology or the actual content of the question. What are they actually talking to me about? I think about that ahead of time. If it was a fill in the blank, what would I write? So I think about that very briefly, and then I go and I look at my answer options and I read every single one of them all the way through. I read every single word. When you're in a higher stress environment, your brain, especially if you're having anxiety, is having a fight or flight response. And you know what happens with that? Your body thinks that it's getting chased by a bear or a tiger or a lion. Lions and tigers and bears. Oh my! Ah, welcome to me. Welcome to my tutoring. But you think your body thinks there's a physical threat. There's no physical threat. It's an emotional threat. And so it wants to get out of that situation fast. And so you may not realize you're doing this, but you're kind of skimming the question or you're reading very quickly. And that's why slowing yourself down and having this process is really important. Reading fully and carefully, very important. Then, after I've read my answer options, I use the process of elimination. This is where your content knowledge comes in. This is where your critical thinking comes in. This is where weighing what is the question asking versus what is this answer answering? Does it align together? And then the last thing I do, if I'm stuck, I use test-taking strategies. So if you have not looked into test-taking strategies, you have some good stuff on ATI. If you don't have access to ATI, if you're in a program that doesn't use it, then don't worry about that. But I do have a test-taking strategies presentation on our CSS YouTube channel. If you go to the CSS D2L site, there is a direct link to those, and you can go take a look at those that will help you. Those are for last resort. If you're like, oh, I don't have any idea what the question is asking, I've never heard of that content before, and then you look through your answer options and you're like, oh, I don't really know what that is. That's when you would use some strategies. Everything else leading up to that is you knowing your stuff and critical thinking. So some ineffective approaches are kind of all opposite of that. So skimming your question, reading through it really quickly, not identifying your keywords, which then you end up missing your keywords, not really knowing or focusing on what exactly the test question is asking, not relying on your own content knowledge. So what can happen sometimes is you see a word that's familiar and you're like, oh, I know what that word is, or I've seen that word in my notes before, instead of actually focusing on what do I know? You know, what have I learned? If I don't know what this concept is, can I pick out a core prefix or a suffix or a stem? Does it lead back to something I learned in anatomy and physiology? I lean so much on my anatomy and physiology when I am doing my test questions, because medical terminology, anatomy and physiology, they are all so important to your overall success, not only in school, but in your career. And you're going to find that out, especially if you really focus in on some of those things while you're, going along in your program, whatever program you're in. choosing an answer because it's familiar or vice versa, not choosing an answer because you've never seen it before. So I've done a lot of exam reviews with students, and one of the things that I see very often and that I've heard very often is, well, I just chose that answer because I remember being on the same page as my notes for another subject, so I figured it just went with that other subject. So you're choosing an answer because it was on the same page as another content area, not because you thought that was the right answer because of the content itself. So don't just choose something because it is or it isn't familiar. Choose something because you have weighed the options and you thought about it and it makes sense or it doesn't make sense and you've eliminated it. So the last thing that people make a mistake is not having a plan in place for when they are like, well, I don't know the answer. So that's really important for the strategy part, to get that in place. So with that being said, practice, and then practice some more, and then do it again. So here are some different websites or ideas that can give you some really good practice questions. So your textbook, turns out it is useful, not only for content, but for practicing. So the more that you can do practice questions, let's just back up a second. The more that you can do practice questions in a quote safe environment, in a non-testing environment, in a time frame where you're not having anxiety and fight or flight responses, you can take the things that we've talked about here, that Danielle and that Kendra and myself have talked about, and practice those strategies in advance so that you are much better prepared for when that higher stakes time frame comes around. So practice as much as you can. I highly recommend getting in and doing practice questions. So your textbook, they usually have back of the chapter questions. Sometimes the answers are in the index, not the index, the appendix is in the back. Sometimes you have to go to the online companion website, which is another area where you can find really, really amazing practice questions and extra study tools in general. If you have ATI, if you use ATI in your program, the ATI books have a lot of good questions in them. Usually they're 5 to a chapter. The ATI website is full of practice questions. You have the learning systems. You have the adaptive quizzes that you can access from inside the learning systems area. You have the targeted quizzes. If you're an internship, you have board vitals. There's questions in skills modules. There's questions everywhere. If you have the RN Mentor app, if you happen to get that before they took that off, there's lots of good practice questions within ATI. The library, contact our librarian because she has so many phenomenal resources for practice questions, online ebooks, prep books, you name it. She has so many awesome resources that you're never going to know exist unless you go and you reach out to her. So practice, practice, and do it some more. Awesome. All right. So now you've got some information about test anxiety, some tips on how to tackle that, and some tips on how to tackle test questions. So we have enjoyed doing this for you. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We really like helping out. It's the whole reason we're here. My contact information is on the slide. Again, my name is Melissa Williams. I'm our nursing coordinator from the Center for Student Success, and my email address is mwilliams@methodistcall.edu. Thank you for tuning in, and don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.